All right, we got just a couple more minutes till 11. We'll probably wait maybe 3 or 4 minutes after just to let folks stream in here.
Wonderful.
I see Tyree. Thank you so much, Tyree, for your comment. I saw what you said.
Glad we could keep up doing the work.
That's right. It's a mandate.
See some familiar names in the attendance. Tammy, hey.
Yeah, hey, Tammy.
Hey, January. Hey, David.
And throughout the program, you guys can ask questions in the chat or make comments. If you have questions that you really want the panelists to see, if you'll ask those in the Q&A section. So you'll see a little chat box at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A, and you can type a question in there so that we can see that and your fellow attendees as well.
Oh, hey, Alex, you got out of training early.
All right, yeah, we got a few more streaming in. And I need to make you... Okay, all right. Welcome to everybody else just coming in. Just so you all know, we are recording today's session, so we'll be posting that later on. We will share the link on our Facebook, so if you have anybody who wasn't able to attend, you can send them the link. I will try to get that up in the next couple of days and get that out to everyone. All right, got just a couple more minutes here. I think we have almost 60 folks who are registered, so we'll probably still have a few rolling in. Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
I don't know about anyone else, but I tend to underestimate how long it takes to open up the computer and get into the Zoom and hit the button and let the link load.
It didn't take long. Nicole, did you see this?
Yes, yes.
Like I almost did a cartwheel out of my chair. That would be phenomenal.
Oh my goodness. See, now I gotta.
Yeah, it makes all things perfect right now, you know.
Oh my God. That would be amazing.
Mm-hmm. She's always over my shoulder.
I know. I would love for her to see I remember when she retired and she was just like, you got this. I want her to be able to see like 10 years later, like I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that was kind of a big moment when she was like, yeah, I can retire now. You good. You got this. I feel, she's like, I feel good about this. And so I'm going to go. And it was just like, wait, where are you going? Like, no. But she saw something that I didn't even see. So, that might have made my day.
Now let us in on Miss Hitty, who's Miss Hitty.
Y'all know about Miss Kitty? So Miss Kitty was my mentor when I started working at Brattonsville, and she kind of epitomized to me what first person interpretation looked like, what it sounded like, what it felt like. She legit, I would always laugh about it because she would legit go into a trance and become Kessie. And people would be like trying to interact with her, and I'm like, Kitty ain't here. We're talking to Kessie. This is what it is. And she would do things to the visitor experience that cannot be duplicated, cannot be replicated. She would, she introduced me to the ancestors at Brattonsville. It's like one day I walked over with her to the original slave cabin, and she's like, just look in the door and tell them that you're here to tell their story. And it was so weird because I was like, why does it feel like people are staring at me? I don't understand what's happening. Like, what is going on? And she's just laughing. And she's just like, tell them that you're here to tell their story. Introduce yourself and let them know that you got this and you're going to tell their story. And that always stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And she stood up for me when we'd have visitors that were extremely racist would come and say stuff to me. She'd take them on a little walk. And then they'd come back and they'd be like, you know what, my bad.
And who knows? And who knows what was said at that cotton gin?
We have because she would always take them down to the cotton gin, show them the pit, and by the time they came back, it was meek and mild, and I'm just gonna go, and it was, and then she would just look at me like, you don't have no problems, and I'm just
handled.
And she was the interpretation of Olivia Pope.
Indeed.
There we go.
Indeed.
And it looks like we've got some folks in the chat definitely agreeing here. She
really, and that's why I think for me, and this might start some of the conversation, but that's why for me, I could never do first person. One, that's just not who I am, but I literally saw what you have to have a gift for.
A bar.
Yeah, there's a bar. You have to have a gift that has to be your calling, because the way that she would endear herself to visitors and the way that she would interact and the way that the stories came across, like that already has to be in you to do. Mm-hmm. And
fake it.
And I realized real quick, I'm your backup. I'm going to be your translator. So when you are in Kessie and people are trying to get questions of now, I got you. Like, it was that tandem pulling of, here's how, let me break down what you just witnessed. Let me break down, let's go to some of these places that she was talking about. Let me go and walk you through it. And we'll have a 21st century conversation, because right now you can't go where she's at. Right? You can't be where she's at right now. Come back in an hour when she's sitting on the porch and she's Kitty again. Right. And then maybe you can talk to her about how you were impacted. But right now, we're going to go for a walk.
And that means the same for every one of us.
Yeah.
Even those of us that were working with her, it was the same. It was no talking to Kitty once she went into first person.
Yeah.
And for me, it was almost like a passing of the mantle.
Yep.
When as she was done, but she would come back to the site and she would do things. But the last time that I saw her was at Magnolia Plantation, and she literally passed the mantle. And it wasn't a choice. I didn't have a choice. It was like, okay, I'm like getting ready to stop this. Yeah. You take it, and keep it moving. So, and she did. Tyree is another interpreter as well. Who she trained and worked very closely with, and still is in very close contact with her. But she literally, it was almost like I want to use the word infusion. It was like, here, you take all of my juju and you do it. And so every time I do a presentation, I take a little bit of her with me. Yep. This is not a Dontavius thing. This is all the blessings. That's
Kessie.
All Kitty and Kessie.
Yep.
But her legacy has to live on some way.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think especially in this particular area of interpretation, it just goes to show how critical mentors are, and how that passion as well as the knowledge and everything gets passed on to the next generation.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got about 30 folks. We're a little bit after 11, so we'll let folks stream in, but we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. My name is Kate Moore. I am the treasurer for the Charlotte Regional History Consortium. We also have Jessica Bustamante here helping moderate, and she is our incoming vice president. We are going to be just kind of stepping back a little bit and more assisting, moderating questions from you all, but mostly just letting Nicole and Don have a conversation between themselves and with us to our benefit. So I'll give a little introduction to both of our speakers today. We've got Nicole Moore. She's the Director of Education at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta, Georgia. She also runs her own consulting company, Interpreting Slave Life, that helps historic sites discuss the emotional topic of slavery in the United States through staff training, exhibit consultation, and program development. Dontavius Williams is an educator and artist who has harnessed his talents to create the Chronicles of Adam, a first-person primary source-based historical interpretation of an enslaved man named Adam. Dontavius combines his experiences as a special education teacher, certified interpretive guide, and storyteller to craft a profoundly moving performance that visitors around the nation have connected deeply to. So with that, I will go ahead and we talked a little bit about maybe some of the introductory type things for folks who may not be as familiar with what it is you do. So if we could start with the two things we mentioned were the difference between reenacting and interpreting, as well as the difference between first person and third person, and kind of what those two things are and what you all both do.
Don, you want to start?
Sure. Let's see. What am I seeing here? I'm trying to use my phone for this broadcast. Isn't this nice? So the question is where we want to start with the
reenacting and interpreting.
Reenacting.
Yeah.
So reenacting, to me, the difference between reenacting and first person is just that you're reenacting, for reenactments, you're reenacting a specific time in history. Say, for instance, the Battle of Hook's Defeat or the Battle of Kings Mountain. That is a reenactment where you have people who don the clothing of the day, and they actually reenact relive the particular moment in time. First person interpretation is you embody an actual person. So the two can happen at the same time. Whereas we spoke of Miss Kitty. So
yep.
At the Battle of Kings Mountain, Kessie may have been at that battle, and Kessie would have been a specific enslaved individual who had a story, and it's the responsibility of the interpreter, the first person interpreter, to actually make you believe that they are that person. Yep. So, for instance, with me, I portray Adam, a blacksmith, and you never meet Dontavius. So this is like a wonderful thing for people who have never actually talked to Dontavius, typically because I leave people kind of at the edge of their seats after a presentation. Reenactments, you have the opportunity to truly talk to the people who are reenacting in 21st century language, and they can kind of get it and kind of help you understand the nuances. But with first person interpretation, no, they will not break character. Well, they're not supposed to anyway. Will not break character, do not know anything about the modern world. And it's as if you are stepping back in time and actually talking to a person from that day.
Yeah. And I So Dontavius and I are kind of the best of both worlds. I am a third person interpreter all the way. I can be at a site dressed out in period appropriate clothing, but I'm talking to you like this. We're going to have a conversation. I might throw in pop culture references, anything that I can do to bridge the gap. Whereas if you're interacting with Adam, you're not going to have that experience. You are going to only be talking to Adam. And Adam will not know what a cell phone is. If you ask to take his picture, Adam's going to be like, what are you talking about? And these are very powerful ways to educate people, because sometimes you need to have a moment where people have not necessarily a theatric experience, but that they are taken back so that they can kind of see in the context of time. But you're also going to need those people who need a debrief, who need to kind of digest what they've witnessed or what they're experiencing. And it's easy for folks to understand if they can start making references to their own life. One of the things that we do a lot when we're doing, especially cooking, we will have people who don't understand. They literally think the enslaved diet was just, we're only eating hoe cakes and pork all day, every day, that's it. But when they see greens, or when they see like a gumbo mix, or when they see purloin, they see chicken and rice, they see these things, we're able to pull in the stories of, you might have had a ration, but if you were able to grow a garden, then you would have these pieces. And for a lot of folks, they start to realize what we interpret as part of the enslaved diet was actually their diet. They grew up on these things. They know what this food is. And bringing them into the conversation that way and saying, all right, let me tell me about what your grandma used to do and how she used to make this. They're still learning one aspect of the history, but they're also bringing themselves into it. And that's building a connection. And that, I think it works really well when I follow Dontavius as Adam, because people have questions and they're trying to figure it out and they're working through it and they're talking through it. But when Adam talks about his family being separated, I can easily pivot to people trying to understand family separations today, or getting them to consider how would you feel if you lost your loved one, if they were taken away from you and you had no choice. And they really start to sit with that and they start to talk through it. And we're doing this all at historic sites. We're doing this in the context of history, and they're able to really, really grasp onto it. So when you have that first person experience, it takes you back in time. It takes you to that moment, and you are looking through that person's eyes, and you're seeing their experience play out in front of you. And sometimes you're like, I get it and I am drawn in, but I have so many questions. So then that's when we can have a conversation, and we're like, all right, so let's walk through what you're feeling. Let's walk through what you've learned, what's different, and let's kind of use the space to really deep dive into what enslavement might have looked like here, what working in the house might have looked like here. How do we register that, and how do we come to understand the greater depth of the institution of enslavement, but also the people that were involved?
Nicole, you made me think of something. When we were down in Lexington, I want to call it a new term, like the sandwich interpretation. So
yes, yeah.
So you, in the middle of you talk, like you would you were talking about cooking and what was happening there during Christmas time, and the candy and the cakes that you were making, and then in the middle of your interpretation, in burst Adam.
Yep.
You know, and it's shocking, it's jarring to the people, because it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? What's happening? But after that initial 30 seconds or so, like you said, they get settled into it.
Yeah.
And then once Adam leaves the room, it's like, okay, so what just happened was, but Adam literally translated, interpretively, translated what you said into 1840, 1850.
Yep.
And then you therein translated what he said back into 2020.
Yep.
And that to me is one of the most powerful experiences, even as a visitor, because I would watch their expressions through the windows after Adam would leave.
Because for some people, it's one thing for me to say it to them. It's almost like reading a book. It's one thing to read it, but it's another thing to see it and to experience it.
Mm-hmm.
And when they would get that experience, then it was like all of these light bulbs went off. And you watch the faces, and as interpreters, we have to be cognizant of not just what we're doing and the history that we're talking about, but we're also looking at our visitors' interactions with us. We're looking at body language. We're looking at faces. We're looking if somebody furrows their brow or if they're just like, what? We look at the kids when they're like kind of trying to touch things, and we are doing so much in that moment to ensure that not only are we kind of hitting a site's goals for interpretive practice, but also that we are helping visitors. If they've struggled with the history, we're helping them reconcile those feelings. We're helping them reconcile what they're learning and what they're hearing and how it might be different. But then we're also getting them to see, oh, okay, this is what this space might have looked like. I wasn't expecting that when I came in here, but Adam just walked me through with how big of a deal a piece of ribbon candy might have been to an enslaved person, and to be able to give that to a child and to save money for that. He was super excited about something that's going to cut his mouth up, but I get it. And then,
or that rum cake that he was going to sneak to his son that the little kid called him out on.
That rum cake was, it was something special. It was something special.
Guys, we had a question. Someone started off like hard hitting immediately with y'all. So
Sorry, yep.
Our question was, how can what we do change what our country is experiencing now?
Nicole.
I think what we're doing right now is, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday on our kind of pre-call, we're experiencing two different ways that people have received and interpret history personally, not the interpreters themselves, but how the public is really reaching out to the history. And I think what we are seeing is a hunger for people to dig deeper, because they're realizing, wait a minute, how come all of this is popping off? One, again, sometimes it takes societies a while to figure it out, to figure out, oh, wait, we tried it this way, it didn't work. Let's try it another way, it didn't work. We need to figure out how to get right. But I think in this moment, as historic sites and as interpreters, you have people who are looking and searching and trying to find. We've only heard a master narrative. We've only heard about the white families and the house. We've only heard about a piece of furniture, but we have never really interrogated who built that furniture, who built the house. We've never interrogated the community that existed on this property. And I think now it's a good time to be in this space and in this moment, because those conversations are happening. Some of them are extremely challenging and people are pushing back, but I see that as they're pushing back because it's so different. And it's hard to learn something new for a lot of people. It's uncomfortable, but diving into that discomfort has afforded us the ability to really get people to stop and think, particularly on plantation sites. Why do people visit them? What are they looking for? What are they looking at? And then taking it away from kind of this inanimate object of a house, of a mantle, and looking for the fingerprints and the bricks, because then it becomes a tangible. Somebody built this. Somebody touched this. And that person was considered property, just like this house, just like this settee, just like the china that they see in there. And that's powerful, because you realize that in this moment, you are not only witnessing somebody reconcile that a human being was considered property, but that the very reason why they are coming to this place is because of their skill, their talent, their forced labor to make what you are witnessing stand 200, 300 years later. And that's kind of what I feel we're seeing, and why this work is so important in this minute, because it's no longer just about a blanket narrative. It is suddenly, why are we here? Wait, who built this? Wait, how come it's still standing? How do we get construction like this again? And those are real questions that people have had. And then when they start to realize it's because you had enslaved men, women, and children doing this work, what they might have learned is, slaves they weren't smart and they didn't know how to do things. They are really realizing you got engineers, architects, designers. All of this is sitting here and their reason, and they're the reason why you are literally able to see their work today. So let's start centering that. Let's start talking about that. It's not to erase the family whose name is on the property, but let's talk about why we're talking about that family's name and how they built that, because their wealth is built on the men, women, and children who created this world.
It enhances their story whenever we do that, and not eliminate the lives of those who were enslaved there.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the first person, to answer that question from the first person's perspective. I have recently done that. There is here in York County, there was a fever in 1843, a sickness that spread over a particular area in York County, and many people died, including the owner of a very large plantation. And that created some uncertain times for that plantation community, for that community in that area. No one knew who was going to make it, you know. And then we think back to the Nat Turner insurrection in Virginia, you know, about 10 years prior. All of these things, just because it happened in the 1830s doesn't necessarily mean that the fear of an insurrection was going to happen again went away. So what I have done as a first person interpreter, and I've done the research, I've thought about all of that, and I turned it into a narrative to be able to tell the story from Adam's perspective. You know, it's 1843, 1842, 1840, whatever. Times are uncertain right now. We don't know what we're going to do. People are dying all around us. And then these white folk are mad and they're scary. They're afraid, and they're making life for us so hard. Fast forward to 2021. There is a fever across this world. COVID-19 has a lot of people afraid. Not to mention what happened with George Floyd, not to mention the fact that they haven't arrested the people who killed Breonna Taylor. You know, these things are real today. So I oftentimes say that we've come a long way, baby, but really not so far. You know, if we look back in time, we really haven't made that much of a difference because we're still facing the same things. It's in how we handle them or how we interpret them. And we can use interpretation to evoke change. That's the reason why I do first person interpretation, is because it interacts with the emotion of the visitor. It's so nuanced that people feel what Adam feels. They understand it. But it takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of time to do it and do it well. But I really do believe that, you know, this type of interpretation will definitely help to change the trajectory of our country and world.
We have about 3 questions that are fairly similar. It's for those seeking to create or improve living history representation at their own sites. What do you see as the most important thing to keep in mind as they start to develop these programs and help recruit and train new living history participants? Well, we actually have 2 specific questions. One, like, how do we do that for Black people, and how do we do that for white people? It's basically those 3 same, you know, are the same question, but there's a proper way for us to do it as white people and y'all to do it as Black people. So can we talk about that a little bit?
I would say, and Don, please feel free to jump in at any time. One of the main things to do in terms of just how do sites even start this is to really investigate whose voices aren't being heard. And that could be women, that would be the enslaved population, it could be children, it could be poor whites whose voice isn't being heard, because all of these voices existed in that time, and create a whole narrative that includes all of those voices, that brings it in. Understand that particularly for sites that have a history of enslavement, that might end up needing to be your loudest voice, because without that labor, that place doesn't exist. And again, I know people getting their feelings sometimes because they're like, oh, what the family, but the family. And cool, that's real great. But when you're looking at the population of a site, particularly a larger plantation, you need to look at the demographics. You need to look at who is the majority presence and who is the minority presence. And what you're going to see every time is that the enslaved population far outnumbered the white folks that owned them. And so that needs to be something that is not only highlighted, but really talked about and really put into context, because this family has this house, they have these fields, they have all of this stuff only because this labor force existed. And getting people to shift into understanding that and seeing that their wealth doesn't exist without this labor and this work happening, that presents an opportunity for your site to really expand. So let's look at the economy of our site. Let's look at socially what's happening at our site. Let's look at what's happening around our site. Let's look at what's happening in our county and our city and how that has impacted. And it may not even be something, when you start to take that step further out, then you might be able to start bringing in current conversations on what does the community look like today? Who are we engaging? Who are we interacting with? That is important. White interpreters should not feel afraid to, and I do this in all of my trainings, you shouldn't feel afraid to tell the stories, because it is disheartening for a person of color to have to work on a site and know both the history of the enslaved and the white folks, and then white folks don't have to have that. Either you're gonna pay me more because I have to know more, or we all gonna share this work. And since slavery was abolished, we all gonna share this work. But it's understanding that piece, that you can't be afraid to say the name of the enslaved person, because guess what? That's why you have a job. That's why you're there. That's why you're working. They are the reason why that position exists. You want to weave, you want to cook. It's really easy to just say, I, as a white person, am doing this today, but let me tell you about the woman that would have been doing this. I, as a white man, is sitting here blacksmithing, but today, let me tell you about the blacksmith that was on this site, and let me show you the things that he would have made. It is so easy. It is so simple. And for sites, for some people to push back so much, it's not just, and I'm gonna be blunt, for those that know me that are on this call, y'all know me. It's not that people don't want to. It's not that there's a real fear. They're lazy and they don't want to.
Thank you.
But you have to do it, because guess what? Your visitors are going to appreciate that more, because they're going to take more of an interest in what you're doing and what you're making, because they understand, wow, I've learned that an enslaved person couldn't read. So how is this woman making this complicated recipe? How is she learning it? How is she committing French styles of cooking to memory? How does she have all of these meals stocked up in her brain? How does she know the measurements? How does that work? That's your way in. That's your way in to really talk about how to hearth cook and how we measure heat with coals and all of those things that you find passion in. How did this woman do this that couldn't read, couldn't write, that wasn't allowed to? How does this blacksmith know how to do all of this? How are they twisting and bending? Who taught them? Those are your avenues. And to not acknowledge that those men and women are the reason that you are able to do this, particularly at these places, you're doing yourself a disservice, but you're also hurting your public. And sites that don't embrace it, you're hurting reaching a broader audience. Never be afraid of who you're gonna lose, because you're gonna bring in the people who are interested, who have always been kind of like, I want to go there, but I don't know. But it is not making excuses for why you don't want to do this. You don't need Black folks to talk about slavery, because there's not many of us out here doing this that are willing to be out here doing this. But the way that you do it, even with first person, and Don and I were talking about this the other day, you can be a white person doing first person interpretation of slavery from the perspective of that white woman, from the perspective of that white man. You're talking about the institution. You're talking about your role in it. You're talking about what you're seeing and what you've observed. And you don't have, Ain't no need to blackface anything. There's no need for you to say, I am a slave. You're not. You are giving the first person account of somebody who witnessed this. And
Nicole,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. David said something in the comments here, and that I was thinking as my first response. It takes a lot of research, and when you properly research and you research and you interpret with common sense and from the heart, you won't make those mistakes of doing things in blackface. I know I have, and hopefully nobody's trying to do that in 2021 or 2020.
Listen.
But I can't put anything past anybody. But anyway, I know in some meetings, I turned some heads when it came to standing up for myself, when it came to interpreting slavery. When you have visitors that are sent clear across the site to ask me why I'm wearing what I'm wearing. Or, you know, I could see if they were sending the person clear across the site to speak with Adam specifically. But why am I wearing what I'm wearing when you're wearing the same thing? It's the same clothing. Mine is just the Walmart version of your, or the Brooks Brothers version.
Yep.
Of your clothing. So it takes a lot. And I see that there's a couple other questions,
I think connected, a lot of people have mentioned and upvoted, specifically asking about resources and training. And I think, you know, David mentioned that he loves to help people out with research. We've got Nicole, Don here, the people that you see that are doing this, and they already know from, you know, maybe more specific perspectives, but they are the people that you can reach out to and hire.
Mm-hmm.
I literally do this as a hustle. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Kate. Nicole, and that was going to be my closing part of that statement was the best way to do this. And I saw a question about, you know, hiring and best practices and things. Call Nicole Moore. This is what she does. And she's really good at it. That's why I'm kind of sitting back and listening. She's my mentor for a reason, because she knows what she's talking about, and she knows exactly how to get this done, from research to training to the interpretive model.
And it takes a lot. It's a painful process, just because you have to be willing to realize that the things that you've always done may not be the best. And that's hard. It's a hard change. But come in willing and having a team that's willing. And for site directors and leaders, sometimes it is parting ways with the people who are super resistant, because in order to get change, you need everybody on board. You need people who are passionate about telling history, but also realizing that over the years, the research has changed. Other voices have popped up. I love that people are so angry about the 1619 project, because like they're inaccurate. No. Is it the inaccuracies that bother you? Is it because that there are other voices that are finally telling their side of the story? Wrestle with that. And my favorite word this week is interrogate. Interrogate that. Dig into it, because that's where you're going to find a lot of the resistance. It's not necessarily that they don't want to. It's because this is totally different. Let's be honest. History has always been a white man's sport. Like, I love the elbow patches, but listen, elbow patches have run this narrative into the ground. And when it is being challenged, and when you're having the voices of women, of white women coming up, and you're still telling them your voice doesn't matter. Imagine the work that is happening with Black authors and Black historians who are really like, actually, let's look hard at this. Expect the blowback, but if it pushes you so much where you're just like, we can't move forward, sometimes you just got to be staff and volunteers. Sometimes you just got to be like, we've hit a fork in the road, and we're gonna go left. Y'all are gonna, you know what? Those are bad directions in this day and time. We're gonna go one way, you're gonna go the other. There we go.
And Nicole, somebody asked if you do virtual training.
Yes, because in these COVID streets, I ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, and I kind of related, you know, we talked yesterday about social media And Deshawn asked, how has social media helped with your craft of storytelling? And I would add maybe with your ability to connect with more people, especially right now when you aren't having as many opportunities to do that face-to-face.
Don, you've done some amazing stuff on Facebook and on social. You should really talk about that.
Well, I got a phone call from Joseph McGill at the beginning of this pandemic. And not a phone call, a text message. If you guys don't know Joseph McGill, he's the founder of the Slave Dwelling Project. But he texted me 2 words: stay relevant. And I was like, what in the world is this dude talking about? And I guess it meant, you know, I later found out that I was really quiet on social media because it hurt to have had my year planned, you know, and then to have a site email me and say, the programs that we had set up for you for the next 8 months, all of them are canceled until without, you know, indefinitely with no date. That's part of my budget. That's a major part of my budget. And it definitely took some wind out of my sail. It really hurt. And so it made me like second guess myself as an interpreter, as a business owner. Should I hang it up? Should I just stop? And when Joe sent me those 2 words, it threw me into a whirlwind of trying to figure out how to, my new favorite word is pivot during the pandemic. And I began to think about ways. And so I've gone live a few times from the Chronicles of Adam Facebook page. I'm now using Instagram more. And when I began to do that, I began to see more collaborations with other social media, what's the word that they call them? Influencers. Yeah. Social media influencers in the world of living history. They have shared my social media, especially on Instagram, Burnley and Trowbridge and Not Your Mama's History. They have, with Cheney McKnight, they have done a lot to kind of push me to the forefront and bait the hook for me. It's just my responsibility to kind of make it work. And so in doing that, that means that's the reason why I created the Uncertain Times narrative, based off of the research that I had done previously. Continue to do research, continue to try and figure out ways to include cooking and other storytelling or other first-person interpretive models in there. So Monday, as a matter of fact, we'll be live at 7:30 from the Chronicles Facebook page. And you'll hear just a little bit from Dontavius, but the rest of the 30 minutes that will be live will be with Adam. And it's gonna be pretty dope. I've done it before, but this time I've had a little bit more time to prepare myself. The first one was really just a, you know, let's just do this, you know, kind of thing. But I've had time to kind of prepare, kind of settle myself, and it's going to be great.
Don, you've talked about researching a few times, and we had a question. It said, in researching how to be that first-person voice, how do you ensure the information you're finding is accurate, and what sources do you recommend?
The WPA slave narratives are my #1 go-to, especially when finding that first-person voice. What better thing to use than the voice of the person who lived the experience? Exactly. I did not bring it, but those things are free from the Library of Congress website. People sell books. They collect the stories for specific areas, and they sell their books. But and I hate to say this publicly like this, but it's the truth. You can find these for free from the Library of Congress. And you can find it for your area. And that's what I have done. I compiled 2 books worth of narratives from South Carolina and printed it. I'm old school, so I still like paper. I went to Office Depot and got it printed and bound And now I have 2 resources to be able to use. So secondly, what I also do is I cross-reference.
Yes.
I use a lot of, that's primary sources, which is the slave narratives. That's primary source. And then I use my secondary sources. One of my favorite historians is Eugene Genovese. He has a book, Roll, Jordan, Roll. There's so many other things that are out there that really are helpful in finding that voice, number one, and secondly, cross-referencing to ensure that you are accurate. Don't believe the hype. This thing don't just come from the air. You have to put in the work.
We had another question that was, what has been the most difficult or growth opportunities that you have faced since starting your perspective journeys?
I think we share, maybe. I'll let Nicole kind of fill this in.
I am a person who thrives off of other people telling me I can't. And one of the first things that I heard in my first site experience was, you'll never make anything out of talking about slavery. And this was from colleagues. And it was almost like that, let me prove you wrong. And I have done that. I have always used somebody telling me that I can't to move forward. And it has been hard because you deal with racism. Some of it is overt. Some of it is really wedged in there. You got to walk through microaggressions. You've got to deal with people saying, well, you're so articulate, you're so this, you're so that. And it always, the thing that drives me is making sure that I prove folks wrong, but also that when they walk away, they know and they're interested and they're excited to learn about the enslaved community. And they see not themselves in the enslaved community, but they see the similarities, because that's when I know that they have recognized them for people. That's when I know that they have seen their humanity. And I know there are some folks who are like, when we do this, we're giving them back their humanity. We're not giving them anything. All we're doing is showing you the humanity that they had all along. We are presenting them as whole people, how they should have been presented in the first place. And when visitors walk away with that, I know it was worth it. And the sidebar is then I get to prove those haters wrong. I get to tell them that this is how we're doing it. This is how we change the narrative. And just because you're not comfortable with it doesn't mean that I'm not going to drive somebody else to be comfortable in their discomforts, so that they figure out, why do I feel this way? And how do I learn more? And what are my connections? And digging deep into their family history and realizing that, oh snap, my people might have owned some folks. Is this why we're always in this community? Is this why our name is so strong in this community and people look at us a certain way? We start to dig into that. But in order for me to hit that level and to be able to reach people, it is pushing through the negativity that people present to me. I have tried to redo how I do some presentations so that I come across more friendly and almost in a submissive way. And I realize that ain't it. You get what you get, because this is a hard truth. These are hard narratives. And sometimes you got to get it raw and uncut, because guess what? When we really start digging deep into these experiences, they're raw and uncut. These are people talking about their heartaches, their traumas, their abuse. They're talking about these things and they're sharing that truth with us. So how do we then register that so that you understand it's not all sunshine and daisies, and you might see us laughing and smiling while we're doing something, but you have no idea that is a coping mechanism. You have no idea that when we're cracking jokes, we are laughing to hide our tears and working through that. And you also don't realize that those songs were coded to be like, these white folks ain't. And we might have to poison their food one day. And it is understanding those pieces that reside in all of that, and getting people to understand that there is a strength in the enslaved community. And there is a strength that we don't talk about, because guess what? It is a little scary. Guess what? That is the majority of the population. It is a psychological terror system that's happening, where you have Black folks outnumbering white folks. So the white folks know that these Black folks can uprise and kill us, but then they're going to put fear into the Black folks so that they can control it. it is everybody rolling around. I use all of that to break down what anybody is saying to me now is nothing worse than what these people endured. So let's push through that. Let's use that energy and let's change the world.
You, as we were talking yesterday, prepping for this, you mentioned that people often say that they're sorry to you. So what would you say to people who maybe did find out that their family owned slaves? Because, you know, like, I think that's a misconception that Black people want white people to be sorry for owning slaves. I don't think that's it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I always tell them, you know, when I have that moment, I let them have their moment, because that's the respectful thing to do. And, you know, you're coming to grips with what you just experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I let them, allow them to have that moment.
Yep.
And then I simply tell them, you know, thank you, but, you know, the best way to kind of mediate or fix this problem is to now share what you have learned.
Yep.
And learn more.
Yep.
And continue to pay it forward, push it forward, so that we don't repeat those actions. And I'm not going to say mistakes, because, you know, as I have done the research, as I do the interpretation, it was slavery was an economy. And it's just that. It was what it was. They did what they deemed necessary to do. I know 150 years from now, I wouldn't want my descendants to apologize for the things that I did, because I made these choices on my own. And I will go on record to say that. I made these choices on my own, and it's not my descendants' fault for the choices that I made to survive in this world today. And
I look at it as it's a way where I always found it weird when people would come up to me and apologize and they'd be in tears, and I'm just looking at them like, for what? Like, what have you done to me? What have you personally done to me? But use that energy, use that privilege that you've gotten from this system, and put that into your community. Put that into teaching others. Like, utilize your moment that you're having, but don't put that back on me. I don't need that. I got it. I got the knowledge. But give that to the people who don't have it, and get them to understand why you're in tears or why you feel this way. Because I already know the history, but they may not. And they may not understand their responsibility to activate the privilege that they have to create change. Like, everybody looks down at privilege and they're like, oh, that's a terrible thing. It's only terrible in how you use it. But if you are using it to position yourself to change for good and to help others change for good and to change narratives so that they're more inclusive, use that. Keep that energy to create change. We appreciate when we see people touched like that. And it's not to dismiss their apologies, but I'm gonna go on record, for me, I don't need it. But the people that do need to see that are the ones that sit with you at Thanksgiving. They're the ones that are in your house. They're the ones that work with you. They are the ones that need to see that impact, because you're gonna have a greater chance of helping them see the light like you saw it than if they came to me.
And we had a question that's kind of the opposite of, you know, the folks who are seeing the truth. Lacey asked, how do you connect with people who don't wish to believe these hard truths, or people who are hard to grab without engaging them in a learning crisis? But they want to keep them engaged and help plant those seeds of change in their minds.
I do it through storytelling.
Yep.
And when you interpret, there's a skill to interpreting, whether you're doing it in first person or third person. There's a skill to it. One of my major tools that I use is eye contact. I scan the room. I pay attention to what's going on during the storytelling. You know, whereas I am all Adam when the hat goes on. I am all Adam, but that interpretive side of Dontavius is still there. Watching the room, watching who is engaged, who is not engaged. I had an event, and it was this is not my definition of the crowd. It was my host's definition of the crowd. It was a Clorox crowd. Not one person of color. Well, there was one person of color in the group, but she could pass for a white lady.
Yeah.
And it was from very southern, like Mississippi, very deep-rooted states. And here I come, looking like me, speaking as Adam, and there's this one man sitting just like this for 30 minutes. Well, the whole time I presented, I continuously would make eye contact with him to see if he was changing. He never changed his stance. But the moment that the story shifted, one little tear
Glory
came
tear.
down his eye.
Yep.
And his arms slowly began to unfold.
Yep.
And he came up to me at the very end of it. And this lets me know how powerful this is. And he said, "Thank you." And he walked away. Now, fast forward to another opportunity. I had the opportunity. What's the lady's name from East Bayou? Debbie.
I forget
Reynolds.
the last name. Yeah. No, Debbie Reynolds was Carrie Fisher's
Soap
mom.
opera lady. Yeah. Well, anyway, there was a celebrity came to a site where we were, and she had a gentleman with her. He was angry. He's a black man.
So mad.
He was angry because he was at a plantation, and he had to pay for a particular tour at the plantation. And so we talked to him, you know, and I challenged him. I said, "Sir, I tell you what, stay for maybe the next 30 minutes or so and meet us at the pavilion. I'm going to do some storytelling." This man, this huge dude, was broken down from the first person interpretation. And his mind was changed. A seed was planted. Now, it doesn't always happen like that. Seeds are planted. Nicole wrote about it in the chapter in the book that she wrote with James DeWolf Perry and was it Kristen Gallis, interpreting slavery at historic sites and museums. She used another story that I used where I met an older gentleman who didn't want to be at the plantation that we were working at because it hurt him. He wasn't willing to receive it. Even though it was coming from another African American, he just didn't want to hear about it. I challenged him and told him that if he didn't learn anything or didn't appreciate the tour, that I would give him $20. That was more than what he paid to get into the event. So he went, and he told me at the very end of the tour, he said, "I've got to come back, and I've got to bring a friend of mine with me, and he's more militant than I am." And he did just what he said he would do, and the same change occurred. There's power in the first person interpretation, but you have to understand and know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you could really mess it up.
And then there's and when you're doing third person, it's almost in those moments easier to do first person because there is that emotional pull. When you're doing third person, sometimes you got to know when to just walk away, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, because whether you change their minds in that moment or not is not going to be as important as what they're wrestling with when they walk away from you. They're still thinking about it. That seed is there. They are still going to reflect back on that and just be like, "Man, that was bogus." Yeah, but something about it will keep popping up, and it's our job to plant the seeds, to get it going. We may not be able to see the evident change, but know that the harder they resist, the more that you've gotten to them. And they are going to keep pushing because what they realize is everything, you just see walls breaking, you just see everything coming down, and they've got to come to grips with it, and they've got to do it in their own time. But don't ever feel like you haven't had that impact, because you have no idea how your words sit and resonate with people hours, days, years after you've had that interaction.
That helps. That's a very good point, because that answers the whole question of, oh, so he was a good slave owner, right? So my response typically, if I'm doing a tour and that question is asked, my response typically is he owned slaves. And the paint on the walls, let's talk about, and I leave it with that, because at the end of the day, he owned slaves. Whether you feed them and clothe them or not, they did not have the freedoms that the slave master did. You know, we talk about our president, George Washington. He was a slave owner, and he was a pretty harsh slave owner at one point. And
On a judge.
Yeah, he was, and she straight up ran away. His body servant, he waited until his death to free him. You know, and when we tell these stories of Ona Judd, and when we tell the stories of the body servant of George Washington in the first person, it gives us a different perspective, you know, of these people and of this time period. So if you hear from Ona Judd, maybe you kind of look at history a little differently, you know, from the old, you know, I didn't chop down the cherry tree guy.
My teeth were from other human beings that I may or may not have owned, like those pieces.
Yeah, whether I bought them or not, you know, is that whatever.
We have a question, and I think y'all sort of answered it a little bit before we even started the webinar, but the question is, who has inspired you, and or who is your biggest supporter that pushes you forward?
My biggest inspiration is Kitty Wilson Evans, who is now retired, but she mentored a lot of us that are on this call. When I came to Brattonsville as a first-time interpreter, she understood that I wasn't going to do first person. She taught me what she knew. She walked with me. She took me to the cemetery. She had me sit with the ancestors. And she would allow me to talk to the kids and talk to the public. And every now and then she'd pop her head and be like, yeah, you got this. And then she'd give me some more. She fed into me. And it was, I knew she was a legend, but it didn't hit me until her retirement celebration that we had, what she was actually doing when she said, now I can walk away. Like, she gave me this legacy, this history, this centuries of 7 families' stories. She said, I know you got this. She did the same thing for Don. She did it for Tyree. She invested what essentially was her life's work into us. And no matter what I do, I never want to let her down. I never want to disappoint her. I want her to understand that we take this work seriously, and we take the lessons that we learned from her to inspire the next generation. Like, because of her, I started mentoring Dawn. It was like, listen, I want to pour in this knowledge that I have to you. I want you to do this. Here's some resources. Get this degree. And he was like, I'm not doing that part.
Right.
but do all of these things and keep feeding and supporting. And we've got partners like Joe McGill at the Slave Dwelling Project. I sit on his board. We are living interpreters with him, living history interpreters with him. It's the community. It's the Black Interpreters Guild. It's knowing that there are people who support us, who have been in these shoes, but that there are generations of people looking up to us. That's what keeps us moving. That's why it's so important. These are sites of trauma, but they are also somebody's roots. This is also the place where they would say, this is where home is for me. And it's our duty to ensure that we tell all of those stories so that when people walk into those sites, they feel the same way that Kitty had us feel, that we feel connected, that we feel the pain, but we also feel the joy in knowing that a community was built here and those legacies last. Because for Black folks particularly who are ashamed of enslavement and being a descendant, guess what? If your ancestors hadn't survived to at least produce somebody that would produce you, that would produce you, that would produce you, you wouldn't be here. And to take pride in that they made it through enough for you to exist. Like, take that with you. So that to me, that's the inspiration, but that's also what drives me. Don?
Same thing. Kitty is one of my greatest inspirations. She is my greatest inspiration. As I said, you probably can't see the picture over my shoulder here, but it's a painting that was done of her. She's on my walls, you know, at my house, at my mom's house. but it's because of the impact that she had on my life, not just professionally, but personally. Kitty is like that grandma that everybody loves, you know. She has so much energy. She's so spry. Even at 80 years old, she was outrunning me on the plantation, you know. It was crazy. But anyway, I remember one of the first Saturdays that I spent with her all day at an event. It wasn't even an event, it was just a Living History Saturday. And she took me around the site. She gave me a tour of the 19th century side of the site. And she was like, the tour literally was 10 minutes. It should have been an hour. And she said, "You got it?" I said, "I think so. I think I can get this." And she said, "Okay, good, because here comes a family of descendants."
Yep.
And
Tell them their history.
A busload of Black Bratton descendants, about 50 of them. And I had to do the tour based on that 10-minute intensive she gave me. Yep. But the thing is, she didn't stay in that one place. She followed behind. And where, you know, I stretched my eyes, I may have looked like I was uncomfortable, she would quickly jump to the front and say, "Okay, so this is," you know, she never left me hanging. Never. And so that's why I say she's my greatest inspiration. Nicole has come in and filled that void. Even today, I know she gets tired of my emails and texts and Facebook messages, but it's so that the next group, the next generation that comes behind me, can get all of this good learning. But I lean on those two women because they mean so much to me, and dollars can't pay you for what it is that they've given to me. And so I want to say in front of everyone, thank you, Nicole. Well, I've told you before, but I really do appreciate you.
That invoice is coming.
Yeah, and because look, all of it will be there, you know, but it still won't be enough to tip you, you know.
Yeah, and it sounds like from our comments that, you know, that goal that you have, Dontavius, is definitely manifest. And Anna mentions that, you know, the African American interpreters at Brattonsville always talk about you, and your legacy lives on. And we also had a comment.
Who's the legacy? My legacy?
Yes. Yeah, they're talking about
you. They talk about you all the time, and Anna is very disappointed that they never got to work with you. Mm-hmm. So you might have to go take a little visit over to Brattonsville.
Nicole, let's go.
And then we had a more of a comment / question, just mentioning how powerful the Chronicles of Adam is, and encouraging you to keep sharing and telling our stories. With that, we are at a little bit after.
We're out of time.
I can't believe it. Were there any last thoughts you guys wanted to share?
Honestly, just for everybody that actually took time out, thank you for being here. I know that we joked a little bit, we had some moments, but take what you've witnessed, learned, heard, and share that. That's like the best thing that you can do for us, is share that. And make sure that when you're working at these sites, and if you are running these sites, that you're not afraid to take the risk, because your reward is going to be so much greater. The public that you hit will appreciate it. You may have to ruffle some feathers, you may have to hurt some feelings, but know that there is a greater purpose in that, and that you have, it's like working in the field. You got to get out the weeds so that you can get a really good crop. So do what you need to do to make sure that a whole story is told.
Well, that Dontavius brought and gone here. But I just want to tell you all to always hold on to hope, even in uncertain times. I know times right now might be a little crazy, but like my mom tells me, when the last time I seen her, And she give me this here, dog. Don't never let go of hope. Because if you ain't got nothing else, but you got hope, you got a future. And keep on pushing on. And don't give up when times get rough. Y'all had a good day now. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Adam.
Yes, thank you, Nicole, Adam, Dontavius. Thank you to everybody who came, and especially thank you for contributing your questions and making the conversation that much more meaningful. We appreciate it. This video, again, is recorded and we'll be posting it online. We will share a link to that on our Facebook. Otherwise, thank you all, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.